So last week, I got this love letter in the mail. I overstayed my parking by 10 minutes, and I got a $115 charge. Is it legal?
The short answer is no. It's intended to take advantage of people who just miscalculate slightly.
The moment that you exceeded by 1 minute, and all of a sudden it's, am I gonna pay this ticket or am I gonna buy groceries?
They get this notice in the mail, you've agreed to our terms, and people are shocked to learn that there were any terms to begin with. Some of these companies are sending tens of thousands of notices a month, and they're reaping the benefits.
It feels like an injustice.
The Driver's Privacy Protection Act, you're subject to a minimum of $2,500 per violation.
Well, Charlie, look, we have a saying among my fellow Jewish lawyers, justice, justice ye shall pursue. So tell me, what are you doing to pursue justice in this space? So last week, I got this love letter in the mail. I overstayed my parking by 10 minutes, and I got a $115 charge, okay? Charlie, what the hell is going on? And just to provide some context, we are here with Charlie Garabedian, who is leading the charge in holding these kinds of companies to account. So Charlie, tell us what's going on. What is this ticket? Is it legal? It doesn't feel legal to me, because when you're charging $10 or $11 to pay for parking, and then you get a ticket for $115, that feels disproportionate, number one. And number two, I never agreed to any of this stuff that's in here. So tell me what's going on, Charlie.
Yeah, so...
And welcome, by the way, to the Courtside podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I think the short answer is no, it's not legal. I don't believe so.
Music to my ears. Let's go!
Yes. Yes, exactly. And what these companies are doing is they're installing cameras at the entrance and exit points of their parking lots or parking garages that they operate.
So are these public or private companies?
These are private companies.
Okay, so these are private companies, and these are private lots? Or
That's exactly right. These are private companies operating private lots or private garages. And what they're doing is they're installing cameras at the entrance and exit points. And those cameras are taking pictures of the license plates, specifically of the vehicles, and noting the time they enter the lot and the time they exit the lot. And what they're then doing is they're cross-referencing that information with the payment apps that they use, where parkers enter the lot and pay through an app, and they're cross-referencing the information to determine if you paid for the exact amount of time that you stayed in the lot, because those cameras capture the entrance and exit times.
But how do they, I don't put my address in. I mean, how do they even know to mail this to me? I mean, it doesn't seem right.
And you're spot on. That's the question I think every person asks when they get one of these in the mail, is how do they get my address? And what these companies are doing is they're accessing either themselves or through DMV or through vendors. They're accessing DMV sourced information, and they're ultimately accessing DMV databases to obtain the registered owner mailing address of the car that has that license plate number. So
here's the outrageous part of it for me. Okay, you got it after 10 minutes. You overstayed by 10 minutes, and there should be a fee for that, right? We're not saying that we should get a free ride. But there is a lot where I've been parking for 30 years that I've been practicing law right in front of the courthouse. It's a very convenient lot. It used to have a person in a kiosk, which you would go to and pay. And they recently upgraded to this system. This operator came in. And I parked there during a recent trial for 2 weeks. And I got tickets almost every single day. Not because I exceeded it by 10 minutes, but the moment that you exceeded by 1 minute, there's a disproportionate charge of $115, right? That's the setting. That's why it's so outrageous. So this isn't, I'm going to compensate them because I overstayed, as I should. If somebody parks in my house, right, I would want to charge some sort of fee. This is, I'm going to punish whatever person that is disproportionately for overstaying. It's part of their business model. That's what they're doing. I mean, is that right? Is that your sense?
That's exactly right. And I think it's set up in a way to be a gotcha kind of fee, where people in good faith are trying to pay for parking in advance. Because you have to remember, this is all payments you make in advance. You're estimating how much time you're going to be out doing whatever it is you're doing, and you're paying for the time you think you're going to be there. And people in good faith try to pay for the exact amount of time they're going to be using the facility. And sometimes people just get that a little bit wrong. And instead of, and they end up with a fee of $115 or $90, whatever, different operators have different amounts, and they get stuck. They get sent that fee, and it's totally unfair, and it's intended to take advantage of people who just miscalculate slightly.
Look, I'm not that old, okay, but there was a time where you would park your car, and you would pay for parking, and there's this sort of social contract around that, which is you can roll the dice and take the chance that a meter maid or somebody's going to come over and give you a ticket and put that ticket on your windshield because you didn't pay for enough parking, etc. I think that that's sort of part of the social contract, okay, of where people take those kinds of chances. This is not part of the deal, okay? These are the kinds of things. It's obviously the $110 or $90 or whatever it is not going to change my life, all right? But it feels like an injustice, and it really pisses me off. I had a beautiful day with my wife, going to Art Basel, wandering around, looking at paintings, and then 2, 3, 4 days, a week later, I get this notice in the mail, and it's like a storm cloud over the whole thing. It pisses me off,
and
Charlie.
And here's what makes it even worse, right? None of that is listed, because if I go onto a lot and there's a gigantic billboard and it says, if you stay or overstay by a minute, then you're going to have to pay $115. Now that's up to me. I'm making that determination, right? This is nowhere written, right? I mean, is there like a billboard? Is there like a terms of use? Where is that written?
There's certainly no billboard. Some lots or garages will have a sign with very small print in the corner of the lot that no one sees, or it might be on the way out where, you're not seeing this on the way in. No one's reading the terms of service on the way out. So they're typically in inconspicuous places where people don't even realize that they're, allegedly agreeing to any kind of contract or terms of parking. So that's another big problem, is people get, they get this notice in the mail, a couple weeks after they've parked, and the notice says, you've agreed to our terms, and this is the result of you agreeing to those terms. And people are shocked to learn that there were any terms to begin with. So I think you hit the nail on the head there.
I want to come back to the terms, because that's when lawyers can really geek out and talk about things like terms and conditions. But Jose's making a really good point too, which is, do any of these say the amount that you're going to be charged? Again, if you walk in and you say, and it says, warning, if you overstay by a minute, you will be charged $100. All right. Anybody under that circumstance will probably overpay to make sure that they're covering the amount. Overpay, you pay an extra $1 to extend in an extra hour, or $3 or $6 or whatever it is. You're going to do that because you know that you're automatically going to get tagged. But this feels like just a money-making scam.
That's exactly right. And so some of these companies will have in small print in a sign, in the corner of the lot, saying that there is some fee associated with an overstay. But again, most people don't see those signs, and most people aren't reading, a 1-page, 1 to 2 page Microsoft Word document that's been condensed into a small sign in the corner of the lot. So,
and I guarantee to you that these companies, they have figured out the highest amount that they can charge without starting basically like civil unrest, right? Because there's nothing that would prevent them from sending you a $10,000 ticket.
Right.
Right?
Of course. But I use, in that parking lot that I just talked to you about, I use Pay by Phone. That was the app that I use. When I use Pay by Phone and I open that app, there's a disclaimer that says, you are abiding by our terms of service. So, okay, now I've accepted it. If I chose not to read it, that's one thing, but at least that app is saying to me, hey, there are terms of use for our app that you should accept, and you are by using it. Fair. The problem is that these terms on this parking operator, they're not part of Pay by Phone.
Right.
Right. So I didn't agree to that.
Right.
So how are you imposing it on me? And what they're saying is, no, because there was a sign posted somewhere in this parking garage. By context, the parking lot, and you know which one I'm talking about.
Yep.
The parking lot in front of the courthouse sits between 2 gigantic old buildings in downtown Miami. So big are those walls that the old Coppertone girl billboard with the little dog pulling on her, swimsuit, that used to be there. Huge. And in that huge wall, they've put a sign that's maybe 3x4, right? So who's getting off to look at that? Who's reading it? You don't even know it's there because you assume that pay by phone are the terms that apply.
Right. I mean, at most you're assuming pay by phone are the terms that apply because, again, how many people are on the pay by phone app and are looking at the terms and conditions of pay by phone? Well, hold on. Before I pay for parking, let me just spend 45 minutes reading, about the venue and arbitration and limitation of liability and all those other things that are in these adhesive contracts.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And kind of to that point, a lot of the people I've spoken with about this issue park in lots where, because it's not just garages, it's also open space parking lots as well. And some of these people park in lots where they thought this was free parking. I talked to someone recently who parked in a lot because he had jury duty and he thought this was a free parking spot, a free parking lot area for jurors to park in. And then, he went to jury duty, came home a week or so later, and he got one of these notices in the mail. So people are not generally seeing these signs and understanding what's in them.
And can you talk about the appeals process? Because I think it's a joke. They have an appeals process, right?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about it.
Technically, there is an appeals process. And what it is generally is you make an appeal to the company that issued you this invoice. And I think it's important to remember that these are invoices that they're sending you in the mail. If you read these notices clearly, exactly. There's going to be language.
Frame that.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be the first exhibit to the lawsuit.
And it specifically notes in the letter that it's an invoice. So they try to frame it as a penalty. But at the end of the day, they're sending you a bill that they would like you to pay them.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the terms and conditions for a second. All right. So in these terms and conditions, my understanding is that, is there an arbitration provision in these terms and conditions?
Some of them have arbitration language. Some of them don't. I think more and more they're starting to kind of adapt and add them into these signs, which, raises a big issue about whether anyone is agreeing to this arbitration provision that's in a sign that no one sees.
And why, and I think it's important to understand that the reason that matters is because if you are, again, you're going to the pay by phone app. That's what you're going on. You're not going on to professionalparkingmanagement.com or whatever parkinginvoice.com website it is. You're going onto the pay by phone app. You're paying for parking. You're being roped into a whole nother set of terms and conditions that you've never seen. And that contains an arbitration provision, which, among other things, means that there's no set of circumstances where you can, number one, get in front of a jury, right? And again, we do have a constitutional right to a jury, even for a $90 parking ticket. Yeah. And number two is you can't bring a class, right? If you're in arbitration, right? You can't bring a class claim on if you're in arbitration. So that's part of the problem of when you're, ostensibly agreeing, quote unquote, to an arbitration provision.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the reason they have these arbitration provisions is because they want to avoid class action lawsuits. At the end of the day, that's what they're trying to do. They don't prefer to litigate disputes in arbitration. They want to prevent consumers from being able to bring these claims at all, and particularly on a class basis.
Well, Charlie, look, just so we have a saying among my fellow Jewish lawyers: justice, ye shall pursue. So tell me, what are you doing to pursue justice in this space?
Yes, so we filed a few putative class action lawsuits against various operators in the space who are operating these exact kinds of lots we've been talking about. And kind of to go back to your initial question about, is this legal? The reason I said I don't believe it is because the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, or the DPPA, is a federal statute that protects drivers' personal information in DMV records. And so what that means is you have a privacy right to protection over your name, your date of birth, your mailing address, importantly, and other personal information that's in your DMV records. And that's the reason why if you take a picture of someone's license plate, you can't just go and search who the owner of that vehicle is just by doing a quick Google search. You can't find that person's address. The DPPA says you can access that information, but only under certain specified circumstances. And some of those are like for insurance purposes, for government enforcement purposes, for bank purposes. It's a very narrow set of exceptions where people can access that information. And so
obviously law enforcement can act.
Law enforcement, exactly. And so we strongly believe that a private company cannot access that information to send you an invoice, which is exactly what it is.
So will you represent me, Charlie?
Absolutely.
Well, actually, I should say this is actually my wife's car, so you're going to be representing her, and she may not be as good in a deposition as I would be, but still, I know you're going to do a good job.
I'm sure she'll be great, and yes, it would be an honor to represent her.
So without getting into any of the strategy or any of the things that we're keeping under wraps for the time being because we're litigating these cases, one, what has the response been from the public at large to these lawsuits that you're filing? And two, what are some of the issues that you're expecting?
Sure. So number one is people are very happy to hear about these cases. Kind of the way this got on my plate is I got one of these in the mail just like Aton did. And when I got it, I was just like, how did they get my address? It just felt so bizarre to see a picture of my car at a parking lot where I did pay for parking. And I went to dinner and just didn't calculate the exact time I was going to be at dinner perfectly. And I think I might have overstayed by 10 minutes. And I got a picture of my car in the mail and I was told, hey, you owe me $90 or $115. And I thought this is it feels bizarre. It felt like an invasion of privacy to me and it just felt wrong. So I kind of, looked into it and that's how this theory came to mind for me. So people are very happy to hear that these
They're pissed off. Nothing pisses people off more than getting those tickets.
It's true.
I'm telling you.
Getting
Or
towed. Getting towed is the worst.
Towed.
That actually I think is the worst.
But this comes a close second.
It's it is a close second. These are honestly like. It's these kinds of injustices, these little injustices like that kind of happen that they really piss people off, and they piss me off. They really piss me off.
Yes. And I think it's because people are trying to do the right thing. People are trying to pay for parking. They're not trying to take advantage of the system. And I think these systems are set up in a way where it makes it very easy for people to accidentally overstay and for these companies to just send these notices en masse and reap the benefits of playing this numbers game where just from public records, we've learned that some of these companies are sending tens of thousands of notices a month. So, if you do the math, multiply that times 100, it adds up very quickly for them and they're reaping the benefits.
And I keep on coming back to how outrageous it is and the pissed off factor, because you're right. $100 isn't going to make a difference to you or to me or to Charlie or anybody in this room. But $100 might make the difference to somebody that is earning, minimum wage, has 2 kids to feed. And all of a sudden am I going to pay this ticket or am I going to buy groceries? I mean, like, really, that's the reality of the world, right? I mean, it's outrageous that they're doing it. I'm glad about the penalties. What are the penalties under the statute? We haven't talked about that.
Yes. So the statute has a liquidated damages provision in it, which says if you violate this statute, you're subject to a minimum of $2,500 per violation.
So let me just pause here. So it doesn't matter if they send me a bill for $1 or $1,000 or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. The minimum that they're going to be responsible to pay for if we can show that they violated the statute by improperly accessing my personal data, i.e. my home address, right, through using my license plate, my wife's license plate, that's a minimum charge of $2,500. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, it's a minimum of $2,500 per violation. And as I mentioned earlier, they're sending a lot of these notices in the mail and that can amount to a lot of violations for them. So it's a pretty big problem.
But what about attorney's fees? Do they have to pay that too?
That's right. Yep. They also are under the statute subject to attorney's fees if
Okay.
the plaintiff prevails. So it's a very consumer friendly statute, and it's intended to protect people's privacy information.
As it should be.
As it should be.
You
Yep.
don't want like just operators of businesses getting my information, knowing where I live, taking pictures of my car, getting access to my tag information. I don't want that.
Right.
I mean, that's just outrageous. That's the kind of stuff that's easy to conceptualize and say, that's just wrong, man. That's just wrong. And that's why the federal statute exists to prevent that kind of
Right. I mean, imagine a scenario where you're driving on I-95 and somebody cuts you off, right? And you say, "Oh, I'm going to look up their license plate and I'm going to figure out where they live."
Right.
Right.
Exactly right.
I mean, the law exists for a reason, and these people are, in my opinion, they're clearly acting in violation of this federal law.
Sure. So, talk to us about arbitration. I know we don't want to get into the strategy behind it, but is that a defense that you expect them to raise?
So that is a defense we expect some of these companies to raise. Not all of them have. So all of these companies tend to have some kind of sign.
And by the way, what does that mean? Like for the people that are going to be listening to this, and we're talking about arbitration, what is the significance of having a provision in the terms of use that professional parking and companies like it? What's the significance of having an arbitration provision in those agreements?
Sure. So generally, arbitration is kind of like a private court proceeding where you can resolve a dispute. And when a contract has an arbitration provision, it typically says you waive your right to seek relief in court. If you want to seek any relief against me, you have to do it in arbitration, and it's typically confidential. So it prevents people, if enforceable, it prevents people from filing lawsuits in a typical court setting. So,
which is public. I mean, everybody has access to that. So there's a privacy benefit to the companies from having an arbitration provision.
That's exactly right. And typically these clauses also have language that say you also, in connection with agreeing to arbitration, waive your right to seek class relief. So the goal of these companies is to prevent consumers from filing class action lawsuits because, individually, these are not very high damage claims, right? Like if I'm suing this company individually for $2,500, maybe I'm not going to take the time to do that. But if all of the people affected band together, then it's more feasible for the people affected to seek relief against these companies. So these companies at all costs want to prevent that from happening. So we anticipate some of these companies will try to enforce arbitration language they have in signs that are, sometimes in the corner of their parking lots or garages that have arbitration language in them.
And listen, it's a smart move. You got to remember that for a significant portion of my practice and yours, we were on the other side representing big companies, right? And time again, I've said, use an arbitration provision because one, it'll keep it private, and two, it'll prevent class action lawsuits, which, by the way, are the scariest thing for companies that are providing consumer services. So that's why when you have your cell phone with AT&T, Verizon, whatever it might be, it has an arbitration provision because the Supreme Court of the United States has said if you have that type of arbitration provision, not only is it enforceable, but you can't have a class action if it says that you've agreed not to have a class action. What's interesting to me, right, and I can agree to that, again, if I buy a plan or buy a phone and I'm using the services and I'm picking on Verizon, but it could be just as well be AT&T, I am making the decision to say, okay, I agree to those terms of use, whether I've read them or not. The problem that I'm having, significant problem that I'm having, is that these operators are trying to impose on me, on you, and the rest of the world, right, or at least where they're operating in the United States, these terms, particularly the arbitration provision, that nobody ever saw, nobody ever willingly agreed to, right? I mean,
you don't even realize, most people don't even realize that this company exists, right? They're going to park in a lot. When you park at these lots, it doesn't look any different than a City of Miami lot, or it doesn't look any different than a Miami Beach parking lot. It looks like every other parking lot. You go in there, you pay on the same app that you use when you park in the city, right? And by the way, I did not pay for parking outside, okay? And I know that I'm on a public street, and my downside scenario is I get like a $36 ticket. I'm willing to roll the dice on that because I always park illegally out here and I never get a parking ticket.
well, that's the going rate for parking around here.
Right.
So you're okay. You're breaking even.
And I'm willing to take the chance that there's going to be a cop that's going to come down, and I think there's probably a 5% chance, right? So doing the math, it works out. Don't pay for parking on this street. This is not ever something that I can abide by.
But you know what the difference is when you park on a public road and a cop or a meter maid comes by and gives you a ticket. Okay, there is an ordinance that has been passed with the approval of the people that live in that, municipality that says, okay, you can't go, you're going to get a ticket if you overstay your parking. That's not that. That's like a private operator on a private lot that's actually doing that.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And they're just trying to play the numbers game and print money for themselves, really, at the expense of, honest people who are just trying to pay for parking.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I for one am rooting for you. I'm looking forward to you obtaining justice for my wife.
Same.
In this case, we'll be sure to update our listeners as to what happens next here. I do also, though, I think it's worth probably touching for a second, going back to the arbitration concept. Why is it that certain kinds of these arbitration agreements are going to be enforceable and certain kinds are not going to be enforceable? So, for example, Jose used the example of Verizon or AT&T, right, where he says, look, when I buy a cell phone or when I join a plan, I'm agreeing to arbitration, and that's going to be protected by a consumer, as opposed to the scenario that we're seeing here. Although whether or not there's an arbitration clause specific for this particular company, why would this be less enforceable than the example that Jose was using?
Yeah. So in Jose's example, you have no choice but to at least have the opportunity to view the terms you're agreeing to. It's on the screen in front of you. You're able to browse through it. You're able to scroll through it. You're able to click on the arbitration actual link potentially. And you can't proceed unless you do that. Typically before you click next or agree, you have to scroll through, or at least have the opportunity to scroll through those terms. Here, these are signs that are sometimes, again, in the corner of the parking lot or garage. They're not in places where you can't avoid them. And most people just don't see these signs and have no idea they're even there to begin with. So it's a very different kind of arbitration agreement, if you will, where, it's not clear and conspicuous to people, and people don't know that they're agreeing just by parking somewhere to these terms.
Because arbitration is a creature of contract.
That's
right?
Exactly.
Both sides have to agree. You don't just get sent to arbitration,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And if you haven't seen the agreement, then the argument that we'll be making in the event that there is an arbitration provision, because we understand that not in all of these operators' agreements there's an arbitration provision, is it wasn't seen. Right?
That's right.
You can't reasonably hold me to terms that I never saw and certainly never agreed to.
That's exactly right. You can't assent to something you didn't know existed. So that's spot on, Jose.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. So how many of these cases have you filed?
We have filed 3 so far.
Okay, great. Well, again, you are truly on the forefront of this body of law. I think it's great work. I think that you're going to be making a lot of people happy through this work. I mean, obviously, our core practice is, large business disputes, representing big companies, sophisticated matters. But this is one of those examples where we're representing really classes of consumers that have been screwed, and I'm looking forward to help you getting justice for these folks.
Same.
Righting a wrong.
Yes, I appreciate it. And yeah, it does feel very rewarding to have the opportunity to represent consumers who feel they're being taken advantage of by companies engaging in a predatory practice. So it's very rewarding. We're in the beginning stages, but I'm looking forward to moving ahead.
Great work, Jordan.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.